Mic check. 1, 2. Are we recording? Hi, I'm Michelle Bernstein, an award-winning chef, restaurateur, and mom. I have a lot on my plate, including my psoriatic arthritis symptoms. That's why I was prescribed Cosentyx. It helps me move better.
Cosentyx secukinumab is prescribed for people 2 years of age and older with active psoriatic arthritis. Don't use if you're allergic to Cosentyx. Before starting, get checked for tuberculosis. An increased risk of infections and lowered ability to fight them may occur, like tuberculosis or other serious bacterial, fungal, or viral infections. Some were fatal. Tell your doctor if you have an infection or symptoms like fevers, sweats, chills, muscle aches, or cough, had a vaccine or plan to, or if inflammatory bowel disease symptoms develop or worsen. Serious allergic reactions and severe eczema-like skin reactions may occur. Learn more at 1-844-COSENTYX or Cosentyx.com.
Ask your rheumatologist about Cosentyx.
It's The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
This is The Other Side of Midnight. I'm Frank Morano. You know, when someone sounds like they know it all, sometimes it's difficult to know if they actually know it all or if they have just perfected the talent of sounding authoritative. When it comes to John Banzhaf, I am convinced that he actually knows it all, at least when it comes to the legal system, but seemingly with a variety of other topics as well. He is a professor of public interest law, emeritus at George Washington University Law School. He is one of the most widely quoted, widely cited law professors over the last 50 years. His activism in the legal profession has led to a whole host of reforms on tobacco safety, consumer safety, a number of other things that we don't have time to list in only a 4-hour show. But he has caught my attention lately for his commentary, not just on the Daniel Penny case, which those of us in New York are following very closely, but I think it goes far beyond New York, but also his commentary on, of all things, Halloween. I am very pleased to welcome back to the program Professor John Banzhaf. John, it's great to talk to you again.
I'm happy to be with you and to discuss Daniel Perry's case, because in many ways it reminds me of the old subway shooter case you had back 40 years ago with
Bernard Goetz. Yeah.
And I provided the legal defense for him, and as you may recall, he walked on the criminal charge, although he got a sock to him in the civil side.
Yeah, Bernie is someone I'm friendly with and a regular listener to this show, and he also happens to be a night owl, so I guarantee you he's listening to the two of us right now. I'm sure he's following this case closely. He has declined all of my invitations to discuss it. But before we get to Daniel Penny, you had an interesting commentary just yesterday about why Halloween is a lawyer holiday, and you said it's very different from other popular holidays, in many ways kind of a celebration of lawyers. How come? This strikes some people as less than intuitive.
Well, some may say it's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but you're right. Most of our holidays, like Christmas and Hanukkah and Kwanzaa and Easter and Thanksgiving, are celebratory. They're happy holidays. But Halloween, we venerate the dead, the undead, witches, zombies, and most especially, of course, vampires. But many people, particularly those who've had experience dealing with lawyers, would argue that the description we usually have of vampires who sucked out our blood while keeping us alive as long as possible in order to satisfy their greed applies equally well to lawyers. And let's just take one example. Mm-hmm. In a day or so, the kids are going to go out on Halloween. They're going to be citing trick or treat. They're going to be dressed up and they're going to be threatening people and wanting to get treats. So in a sense, at a very early age, we're teaching to act like lawyers, to use deceit and deception, trickery, cunning, threats, fear, coercion, extortion to get what they want. And that's exactly what lawyers do. And I'm not alone in saying this. There's a very popular lawyer website, and they once had an article that said, Isn't just being a lawyer scary enough? Another one on the same website, again for lawyers, said, quote, career opportunities for attorneys. Vampire?
So it sounds like a lot of the jokes about lawyers, a lot of the stereotypes about lawyers, which are almost overwhelmingly negative, you think that at least in many cases they're well deserved.
Well, in some cases, here's the interesting thing: when surveys are done, most people say their lawyer is good. It's the other lawyer that they condemn and fear and are worried about and would allergize to a vampire and want to see them strung up and run off cliffs and so on and so forth. We don't do that with doctors, for example. We joke about doctors, take 2 aspirins, call me in the morning, and they all golf on Wednesday afternoon, but it's not killing them. But think about it. People run into lawyers usually when they're under great stress.
Right.
You're sued, you're arrested, whatever. Also, when you're in court, your lawyer is working to help you, but there's this guy on the other side of the courtroom who's working like hell to put you in jail or to extract millions of dollars from you. Imagine if you were in a hospital bed or an operating room, and your doctor's working feverishly to make you better, and there's this other guy over there with another knife, and he's trying very hard to make sure you never make it. That's why I think the lawyers are much more the butt of jokes, and very vicious jokes in many cases, than doctors or broadcasters like yourself.
Yeah, makes sense. All right. Let's talk about the Daniel Penny case. I think most people listening understand the broad strokes of the case, that there was someone that was mentally disturbed on the train, and he was threatening the other passengers, and Daniel Penny, a Marine veteran, ends up restraining him and ultimately kills him. You argue that Penny was acting as a good Samaritan rather than a vigilante. However, given that vigilante actions often stem from a belief that existing authority won't act effectively, how do we ensure that individuals stepping in aren't circumventing law enforcement in dangerous ways?
Well, obviously there was no law enforcement in that situation, and the law of New York, like the law of most jurisdictions, wants to encourage people to go to the aid and protection and defense of others, because in many cases, probably most cases, criminals don't do bad things when there's a cop standing nearby who's going to rescue you. So the law is very, very forgiving and I would almost say encouraging. What it says is that you can use reasonable force to resist any time you have a reasonable belief, and I've got to keep stressing that, reasonable belief that somebody is going to use unlawful physical force. Doesn't have to be fear of death, doesn't have to be fear of physical injury. Unlawful physical force could mean somebody's going to pick your pocket. Somebody's going to grab you, grope you, or whatever the term might be. And again, all you have to do is have a reasonable belief. And let's explore that for a minute. An unreasonable belief means your belief is not unreasonable. Example, I've got a lot of people at my law school who think anybody who wants to vote for Trump is absolutely crazy.
Right.
He's going to do all these horrible, horrible things. You've got to be nuts to vote for him. But since at least, 40, 45 or more percent of people do think that Trump would make a better president than Harris, obviously their view is not an unreasonable one. And, of course, you can turn that around, people who think the same thing about voting for Harris. So the question is, was his view unreasonable? Well, lots of the passengers were in fear of their lives. They said so. You had 2 of them who were actually helping hold this guy down, so they certainly thought it was reasonable. And by the way, if Perry is charged with a crime, shouldn't the people who were holding him down, holding the other guy down, also be charged? They're aiding and abetting. They haven't been. You get the Perry also waited around. He didn't try to run away, didn't try to hide anything. Unlike that other case a year or so ago with George Floyd, nobody was saying, let him up, he can't breathe or whatever. So if you look at it strictly from the point of view of law, as an abstract thing like I'd have on a bar exam, unquestionably he would be not guilty. The problem is when you go into the real world, because here you have 2 conflicting things. First of all, you have a deceased who's black, and the person who is charged with the crime is white. You also are talking about New Yorkers, which, as you know, tend to be quite liberal. They're a very blue jurisdiction. On the other hand, many of these people do ride the subway. They are subject to the same kind of thing, so they know that this thing can and does happen. Many of them have been put in fear of their own lives. In fact, I picked up a piece by John McWhorter, who writes for the New York Times. He's black. He's a 60-year-old guy in good condition, large stature. And he says about once a week, it makes him genuinely afraid that you're going to be assaulted. So people with that kind of experience can certainly sympathize with
Penny.
or at least feel that it's a good idea that there might be somebody else who's going to go to their aid if that happens to them. On the other hand, we're lawyers, we always have the on the other hand. Many New Yorkers who regularly ride the subway may become inured to that. Oh, yeah, sure, this happens every week. Who cares? We put it all. We're tough New Yorkers. He overreacted.
At 30...
So from a legalistic point of view, very clearly not guilty. From a realistic courtroom point of view, not as clear. But I can't believe there wouldn't be at least one person it's the subway who's experienced the same thing, who says, I'm not going to vote guilty, and that at least is going to be a held jury.
At 30 minutes after the hour, this is The Other Side of Midnight. My guest is distinguished professor of public interest law, Emeritus at George Washington University Law School, John Banzhaf. We're talking about the Daniel Penny case, which is currently in the midst of jury selection. You point out that Penny wasn't seeking conflict. And look, I agree with everything that you've said in this conversation and your other commentaries. But did his use of a chokehold go beyond what might be considered a reasonable measure of restraint under New York law?
Well, a couple of points. First of all, I'm not at all clear that it was a chokehold. I've looked at the tapes. You've looked at the tapes. A chokehold is one which cuts off either the air or the blood flowing to the brain. It's not clear that it was doing that. I wrestled while I was in college. We regularly used holds around the neck. We were taught how to use holds around the neck, perfectly legal, and it's not a chokehold, as long as you're not cutting off his wind or his blood. In fact, if you've watched, and many of your listeners probably did, watch the Olympics, if they watch judo, you see that many judo matches are ended by a chokehold. So it is regularly used. It is those, even chokeholds, as I've defined them, are regularly used by many police officers, by sheriffs, and so on. They usually do not, very rarely do they result in death or serious bodily injury. Other so-called non-lethal tools which are available, such as mace or tasers, or even a good solid punch to the gut can kill somebody. That doesn't mean that it's an unreasonable force. And if you ever tried to hold somebody down, you know it's very difficult to do. There were 3 people trying to restrain that guy, and he's still kicking and screaming and trying and getting out. And so it's not at all clear, first of all, that it was a chokehold. Secondly, under the circumstances, how else are you going to hold him down?
You know, you're so right in that the difficulty of holding someone down who doesn't want to be held down. I try to restrain my 3-year-old at times, and he can be sometimes more than I can handle. You can only imagine what it's like for an aggressive grown man, that's for sure. So
let me add one thing. Bear in mind, this is something I think most people know. People on certain drugs will frequently exhibit strength, which they describe as being 10 times as strong. And also, they frequently feel no pain. So what we call a pain compliance hold, like a hammerlock, where if somebody tries to get out of it, he'll just hurt himself, doesn't work on these people. So if you're having trouble with a 3-year-old, this guy looked like a full-size guy, and for all they know, he might have drugs. For all they know, he might have a knife in his pocket or in his boot or whatever, which he would pull out if they didn't hold him down. And you can see that the 3 of them are struggling to hold him down, and Neely doesn't say, okay, I give up, I'm going to stop, I'm just going to lie here. He doesn't do that.
Right.
And so far as we know, he didn't even say, I can't breathe. So it's unlike some of these other cases.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
Choosing a bottled Starbucks Frappuccino drink that's all flavor and just 100 calories? Easy. Choosing between creamy vanilla, double chocolate, and sea salt caramel flavors? A little harder. Try the delicious new Starbucks Frappuccino light drinks. Look for them wherever you buy groceries. Start with Starbucks coffee.
In state and local government, tech upgrades aren't optional. They're essential. Whether it's improving digital services, protecting public data, or modernizing outdated systems, the demand for skilled IT professionals has never been higher. CBT Nuggets helps you stay ahead with affordable, on-demand IT training that's built for your schedule. Our short, practical videos and hands-on virtual labs make it easy to build real-world skills in networking, cybersecurity, cloud technologies, and more. You don't need expensive hardware or complicated setups, just a browser and the motivation to grow. Whether you're an IT admin, public service tech, or new to the field, CBT Nuggets gives you the tools to better support your team and your community. And with new content added regularly, there's always something relevant to learn. Join thousands of learners who are upgrading their skills and advancing their careers. Start your 7-day free trial today at cbtnuggets.com. Because smarter tech skills don't just help you, they help your whole community succeed.
The tragic outcome in this case was a fatality. How do we balance the need to protect passengers with the equally critical need to protect vulnerable individuals like Neely, who was killed here, who may not fully control their behavior due to mental illness?
Well, I think the way you put that question really answers it. That is, you don't punish people like our Good Samaritan here, who risked himself, his own safety, to go to the aid of others, because lots of people on that train were saying they were greatly in fear of their lives. Mm-hmm. What we should be talking about, although it doesn't come into the criminal case, is the governmental actions or inactions, which in New York and many other places, unfortunately, do permit violent, mentally deranged criminals, including those who had numerous convictions for exactly what he did, to regularly ride our subways, to harass people on the streets, and do other things which put people, like even this writer McWhirter, in a very real fear that he's going to be physically assaulted. He says once a week. So this is something, which is beyond my scope, or probably your scope. How do governments better deal with these people? At some point, perhaps they have to be taken off the street. Perhaps at some point there has to be some additional controls on them. But I don't think the answer is discouraging the few people who have the courage and the wherewithal, like our Marine here, to go to the aid of others. Remember, he wasn't afraid for himself. He's a big guy. Right. He's not going to be afraid of Neely. He was acting because other passengers were afraid of what he would do. And I think the last thing in the world we want to do is bend over backwards to discourage that. If anything, we want to say, look, you go ahead and do it as long as you didn't act unreasonably. As long as you didn't act unreasonably, we are going to protect you.
If you're just tuning in, I'm Frank Morano. You're listening to The Other Side of Midnight. My guest is Professor John Banzhaf. We're talking about the Daniel Penny case. You mentioned the Bernard Goetz case, and as I said, Bernie's probably listening right now. Many people have compared this case to Bernie Goetz, but Goetz was acquitted by a jury that sympathized with his sense of fear in a very high crime era. Do you think that today's social dynamics, including the attitudes towards mental health, the use of force, make Penny's case more difficult?
No, just the opposite. I think with all due respect to Bernie Goetz, he was carrying a gun. Also, he was protecting himself. He was not protecting anybody else. So that's a kind of a mixed motive situation. Here, as I said, as I see it, this Marine was not protecting himself. If Neely had come over and harassed him, he could give him a good punch in the nose and get rid of him. He's acting to protect others. He was probably aware of what happened to Bernie Goetz and a number of these others, George Zimmerman down in Florida, Carl Rowan, what they called the jacuzzi shooter, who was you may recall, he was a great champion against the use of guns, but when somebody came into his backyard while he was using his jacuzzi, he pulled out a gun. So I think this case is a lot better, clearer than Bernie Goetz's case. Mm-hmm. And also the fact that all these other passengers are backing him up. I don't recall that was in Bernie's case. The fact that I think, if I remember it correctly, Bernie didn't hang around when this was over. He kind of went away.
He left away. That's exactly right.
Which,
yeah.
As we lawyers say, is an indication of probable guilt. Here, the Marine did just the opposite. He remained behind. He asked people to call the police. He cooperated with the police. Oh, and by the way, when the police showed up and talked to the people who actually experienced it firsthand, and while it was fresh in their mind, they didn't arrest him. They didn't even give him a desk ticket to appear. So people on the scene, also thought that what he did was reasonable and therefore protected by law. I think, we're more sympathetic to people who have mental problems, but I think we're also more attuned to the problem is that sometimes these people, because of their mental problems, can be a threat and a risk to others, and this would be more women and children, and we've had such cases.
With $2 million raised for Penny's legal defense, does this sort of public support create any risks of emboldening citizens to take justice into their own hands, particularly if they feel the public and the legal system are going to back them afterwards?
I don't think so at all. I've been involved in quite a number of cases. It is held to be charged even in a civil proceeding, much less in a criminal proceeding. As I understand it, this Marine is not going to get any money left over. The money goes solely to his defense. So for whatever this period of time has been and forever long this trial goes on, he is under the gun that he is going to be spending time in prison. He may very well overspend the amount of money which has been spent so far. And I know from personal experience that many people are reluctant to get involved no matter what it is. I was in a situation where a bicycle rider was injured on the road. I was with a very famous doctor. I said, well, let's go help him. And the doctor said, I'm not getting out of this car. I'm afraid of being sued. And that's a civil suit. A civil suit. So I think most people are reluctant to go to the aid of somebody else, particularly where they would be at risk of a civil suit, a criminal proceeding, or simply getting hurt. I don't really think everybody's going to say, oh, I think the thing I will do, I'll go out in the subway and hope somebody like Neely comes along and I'll beat the crap out of him and I'll have all this fun.
Well, similar question if the jury acquits Penny, could this lead to greater hesitation among bystanders in stepping in during subway confrontations because they do fear the legal repercussions? They see that Daniel Penny has been charged with a crime, even if he was ultimately acquitted. Does this lead the next guy to be more hesitant? I'll never forget the day after this happened. One of my colleagues privately said to me off air, you see, that's the lesson here. Don't get involved. Don't do anything. When you see something happening, walk the other way. Or if there's an acquittal, would it embolden more civilians to take action? What do you think?
I think that ship has already sailed. I think the mistake which was made was in bringing the charges in the first place. The charges have now been brought, so people will have a fear that they will be charged. If he is found guilty, which I think is very unlikely, that fear will be increased. If he is found not guilty or there's a hung jury, it will be less. But still, the fear of being civilly sued, of being criminally sued, or of being injured. And we shouldn't overlook that. I mean, as I say, I wrestled in high school. I'm a reasonably big guy. I think I can take care of myself. But I would be very reluctant to go up against somebody like Neely, because I don't know how strong he might be. I don't know if he might be on drugs. I don't know if he might have a knife or a box cutter or something else. And so I was very distressed when he was charged. And I think the same thing is true of some of these other cases where I think they should never have been brought, including the Bernie Goetz case.
Finally, sir, unrelated to Daniel Penny, you've been, as I mentioned, a warrior in the fight against the tobacco companies over the years. I read a commentary from you that this Halloween, parents should tell their children about the real monsters, which are essentially the tobacco companies and tobacco. This is something that the United States, in terms of public health initiatives, seems to be doing far better with than it was 20, 30, 40 years ago. Seems there's many fewer people smoking and many fewer young people smoking cigarettes than there used to be. Doesn't that show that what we're doing is working? Why do you think it's important that parents emphasize this now?
Okay, just the opposite. And it would probably take us a whole other session to talk about it, but I think what you'll find, and I worked and lived and breathed this stuff,
I know,
is that the reason we have far fewer smokers today is because I got anti-smoking messages on the air. I drove cigarette commercials off the air. We started the non-smokers' rights movement, which was a major factor today in getting people to quit or not to start smoking, and Congress has not done a damn thing, which has been worthwhile, and in fact they have actually hurt us by putting health warnings on, which gave the tobacco companies some kind of
cover,
excuse, legal justification when we tried to sue them. The reason I think parents should warn kids is, despite all of this, despite the fact that we're doing far better than we did in the past, thousands of kids every day are still starting to smoke and are becoming addicted to nicotine. So at a time when they're concerned, they're heightened about witches and monsters and vampires and so on and so forth, let's use this as what we call a teaching moment. Let's say, kids, vampires aren't real. They don't really try to enslave you. They don't really try to take advantage of you. But I have to warn you that there are people who do that, and despite our best efforts, they do try to get you hooked. It's not on blood. They try to hook you on nicotine, and smoking even a few cigarettes or using a few e-cigarettes can get you hooked on nicotine. You become addicted, and so you ought to be real careful. So kids, when you go out tonight, be careful of cars, and also remember, when you get a little bit older, you don't want to be enslaved by the tobacco industry any more than you want to be enslaved by a vampire.
Well, it's good advice, and as a parent, I will certainly take that to heart. We've been talking with Professor John Banzhaf, one of my favorite guests, and if you want to comment on any portion of our discussion, you're welcome to give me a call. Our phone number is 646-720-0635. That's 646-720-0635. John, it's always a treat to talk with you. Let's do this again soon.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. All right, we'll continue with your phone calls at 646-720-0635. Straight ahead.
Kick off summer with Memorial Day savings at Lowe's. Right now, get 5 Scott's Naturescapes 1.5 cubic foot mulch bags for just $10. Plus, get up to 40% off select major appliances and save an extra $50 on every $500 you spend on select major appliances $396 or more. Lowe's, we help, you save. Valid through 5/28. Mulch offer excludes Alaska and Hawaii. Selection varies by location. While supplies last. See Lowe's.com for more details.